physics video. Yay. DraftScience. Yes, I'm wearing a Nike shirt. I'll just point out. There's always people making these cracks, So some guy cracked on one of my web pages somewhere, about me having a Nike shirt. Like I bought it. I didn't buy it, okay? It was given to some 80-year-old guy as a birthday present or something, and it just wasn't his style. So I ended up with it. But I haven't bought any clothes in 30 years, okay? I wear shit that people are throwing out. That's it. There's no other source of clothing. I'm just so sick of people. I mean, these little nitpicks. They're so irritating. Oh, I got you. You can get shit, asshole. Anyway, and I happen to look really good, and it just happens to work out that way. Anyway, yeah, just do it. Physics. All right. So I was thinking of establishing, trying to break this down into like laws or themes or whatever you want to call them. What part of the superfluous relativity bullshit and all of Einstein's math and all that crap, how it can be consolidated into these underlying principles. I've been watching some Susskind, and it's kind of funny. Like, this is like a second lecture on general relativity. I mean, by the time he does the 15th lecture, he's using the word convergence all the time. And in this one, he's using the word divergence. And it's like a negative divergence is the convergence, but it's like he's avoiding the word convergence for some reason. And it's just, well, whatever. It's just kind of funny. Anyway, but it's just this whole idea of like he's thinking of gravity. He's equating it to a fluid. And it's just so, you're just like saying, well, why don't you just go the next step? Just take that next step and admit that's exactly what it is. It's a thing. It's not nothing. It's a something. All right. So anyway, so it begins. The first law is, the first statement is, the universe is a bit field. So it's just bits, and the bits are directional bits. So if I'm going to illustrate the universe, the quanta of the universe, the illustration is going to be this. This is a quanta. They're all the same, exact same length or amplitude, and they all move exactly the same speed, which is the speed of light. And that's everything in the universe. Everything. Nothing isn't this. Everything is made of that. It's everything in the universe. The entire universe is that. It's a bit moving a constant speed, the speed of light. There's no variable speed. There's no relativity crap. There's no perspective. I mean, this stuff gets so amazing. I mean, I really understand what I'm up against. I mean, I thought it was bad enough, like in the single slit experiment, when they're creating the artifact of the two waves out of sync, even though it's a single slit, by just dividing by 1/3 and just making up this incredible theory that these waves all cancel out and therefore there's two waves left and then they interfere with each other. I mean, it's just so convoluted. And then I saw the Veritasium guy did a video on electric charge, I think, or magnetism, one of those. And it was talking about like a conductor, I think, yeah. And the electrons and the protons being on, as they get distance between each other. And his theory was that this is general relativity that's creating the charge, because the protons are moving so much faster than the electrons that the protons get really small, and so there ends up being more of them because they're getting smaller because of general relativity. And you're like, it can't do that. It can't make more of them. It can't do that. But anyway, you're just saying, look, he did it, okay? I mean, he made it sound reasonable. to think that from the electron's perspective, there's more protons because they're shorter. From the electron's perspective. Anyway, I don't mean to be mocking, but I just mean that this is what I'm up against, is these people come up with really, really great stories to defend this fucking Sasquatch of nonsense. Alright, so, sorry, that's a sidetrack. Alright, so the universe is just these things, just arrows moving in a direction. So the direction can be any one of the gazillion directions in 3 dimensions. That's it. And in the universe, as we know it, there's a complete balance in the directionality. So there's just as many going this way as there are that way, as there are that way, as there are that way. So any way you look at it, okay, there's no vector underrepresented. So it's a huge pressure gradient. It's a huge place where just there's stuff in a perfect chaos, you could say. And the only time things become when things are visible is when there's imbalance. When there's some place where there isn't the same thing on this coming from this side as there are coming from this side, or this side from this side. So when the opposites are not in balance, that's when you have a something. Otherwise, there's nothing. The entire field is invisible, unperceivable, unmeasurable, undetectable when it's in balance. So most of the universe is invisible, is undetectable, doesn't in a sense exist perceptually because it's balanced. And it's only when these bits get captured, circular orbit. So it's the capturing that creates a kind of imbalance. Now it's a thing that can be become invisible when the capturing becomes balanced. But most captures are not balanced, like most orbits aren't balanced. They're not perfect. They have an imperfection. The solar system, for example, quite realistically could be rolling through space because of the imbalance of its matter, its mass distribution, and the momentum of that mass distribution, the net directional possessions of all those things, the arrows all added up. If you take all the vectors of all the arrows inside the sun and inside all the planets and you add them all up, you might find there is a directional vector net left over, a remainder that's out of balance. And that's the direction the solar system is moving. Don't know if I want to go there, but I did. Anyway, so the rule is it's all directional bits. So these are the quantons. These are the thing the universe is. And they get captured in these orbits. And I've sort of explained that the idea of an orbit is 2 arrows come in contact with each other. Now they can exchange. The exchanges are all kinetic. So I should put in here somewhere the kinetic rule. 2 things come in, 2 things come out. The question is, did this go here, and did this go here, or did this go here? So that's the real question. Did this happen, or did this happen? And that's the mystery of the universe. But anyway, these angles can be any angle. They can be quite obtuse, an angle. And what comes out is the same thing that went in. It's always the same thing that went in that goes out. So cross that out. It's just that now this thing can be captured. So what I'm basically arguing, I've sort of drawn this picture in other videos, so I'll do it real quick. What's happening in an orbit is there's an exchange between this arrow's going this way. And that arrow comes down this way, hits it, and now this arrow goes this way, this one goes this way. This one leaves. Now this one gets hit by an arrow going this way, and it goes this way. And so that you can get the idea that it ends up in a pattern. And that pattern is maintained by a probability of arrow encounters that will take place based on what you're blocking, what these arrows end up absorbing. So as you create this orbiting system, it will block stuff from moving to some other thing that might be in its vicinity. So now things end up being pushed into each other. So just as two arrows could be envisioned, say these two arrows here, this one and this one, can be understood that all it required is that this arrow exchanges with an arrow going up, this arrow exchanges with an arrow going down, and now these two arrows are still in association with each other. And as long as that keeps happening, they'll end up being in orbit. And the point is I don't have the law for this one yet, but there's a law, a minimum, that once you've obtained that minimum number of improbable sequence of events, the creation of that square through just chance. I mean, the arrow coming down, the next arrow could have pushed it that way, and the next arrow could have pushed it that way, and it could end up way over here instead of in this box. So it's an improbable event that creates the pattern, the first pattern. But once the pattern is created, the probability of the constant pressure will maintain the pattern. And it will be a probabilistic inevitability that the pattern will end up permanent. So there becomes permanent patterns. So that's a word I should add here, is the creation of permanent patterns. And I don't mean permanent in the absolute sense, I just mean durable. Let's say durable. I'll write that word down just so I can add it later. So durable patterns are created. And now these patterns can be perfect, in that you could have that perfect square, or you could have a hexagon, right? The 5 sides hexes. No, it's a 6 side. Octagon is 8. Well, anyway, the 5-sided thing. Obviously, the 5-sided thing has a problem. You know, because there will always be 3 things on one side and 2 on the other. There'll always be an imbalance. There won't be a perfect balance of up-down direction or horizontal direction. So, in that circumstance, that would be like an elliptical orbit. The orbit isn't just elliptical; it's eating space in a direction. It'll move because it has an extra arrow going in one side than the other. And wherever that first arrow is likely to be, if it's a permanent pattern, a durable pattern, the durable pattern will tend to roll in a direction. So the extra arrow influence in the vector somewhere in that away, you know, it could be that away, it could be that away, or it could be that away, but the strength of that vector, the combination of the vectors of any imbalance, will decide which way it goes. And obviously in this system, things could go rather not straight. So once you create a pattern, patterns are capable of having a great deal of wobble or eccentricity in how they will end up eventually moving in the direction of the vector. They won't necessarily move in that direction in a straight line because of the nuances of probability. The fact that it's probable, but it's not absolutely certain. The probability is over permutations. So for each permutation, the probability doesn't reveal itself. It's only in the collection of permutations that the outcome will be, it will go from here to here. Here, well, you can't see that. Here to here. But it might not necessarily go from here to here in a straight line. It'll go from here to here probabilistically, one permutation at a time. So it'll go tails and heads and tails and heads. In the end, it'll be 50-50, but it won't be 50-50 at any one point in the creation of the inevitable probabilistic outcome. That was more than I wanted to add on that, but the idea is pattern, and the idea is balance and unbalance, and the existence of unbalance is what you will see as movement. That's what we call energy, generally speaking, is the creation of an imbalance. So when something has 5 sides, when something has 7 or 9, the odd number, the out of balance is what creates something that you see or perceive as something moving or generating force. It's imbalanced. It's not stationary because it has an excess number of arrows out of balance. It's got more going this way than that way. Alright, frequency is a kind of pattern. So once you can sort of understand that, once you create a pattern, once you create something with a bunch of orbiting things in regular sequences, that if these things were released, say this was an X1, this was an X1, and this was an X1, if you released X's by their orbit, that they would end up having a period or a distance between them. And that's the nature of frequency, is that the pattern is associated with the collection of things, of equal things. The quanta are all the same, and when you let these quanta that are identical and you release them by some regular orbital speed from a system, they will leave at a regular sequence that you will recognize as a frequency. So frequency is a kind of pattern, and it's fundamentally reveals a kind of imbalance, in that you're not likely to have coincidentally a frequency of incidences coming from identical vectors to the same location. So there would never be a circumstance where something that has frequency would be invisible, because it would be very unlikely to have a circumstance where frequency would be opposite, equal in location and intensity. Now the entire universe could have a frequency that would be undetectable, because it could be a frequency, a period in the entire system that probably wouldn't be easily revealed. It's theoretically possible. I see no reason to create one, but it could be there. But it would be difficult to view or see or find, unless you're explicitly looking for it. Alright, anyway. So what's happening is merely the exchange, the kinetic interaction. The kinetic interaction is whole, it's complete. So let me just draw it one more time. It's just these stupid arrows. 2 arrows come in, 2 arrows go out. Okay, an arrow goes this way, an arrow goes that way. And the question is this arrow doing a U-turn, and is this arrow doing a U-turn? Or are the 2 arrows going right through each other? And this is only a significant question when you understand what an orbit is, which is the constant exchanging of one direction for another direction that keeps the thing moving in. And so now it's relevant in the sense that, yes, these have all been exchanged. The same, it's like visualizing the Earth going around the sun. And if you imagined zillions of other Earths crashing into the Earth all the time, and they would be just like ping pong or cue balls, they just knock each other out, and the other one replaces the one that was there. So the original Earth is knocked out, a new Earth takes its place. And then another one comes in this way and knocks that one out and it stays. And another one knocks that one out and it stays. And another one knocks that one out and stays. So it's never the same Earth. And none of these bits are actually, the ones that are interacting, the ones that are part of what we see as the moving, alive universe, the energized universe, none of those things are the same arrows. The arrows I am right now will entirely be new arrows a zillionth of a second from now. All of them. They'll be completely different arrows. None of me is me. I'm always constantly changing the source material. The source material is constantly being exchanged. I'm never the same quanta from moment to moment, from perceivable moment, from quanta Planck time quanta to Planck time quanta. I'm not going to be the same thing. So it's just this kinetic exchange. So it's just all this is about is directional exchange. Directional bits exchanging their direction with each other, and the fact that direction can be collected, and once collected it blocks directional pressure, creating imbalances that create more imbalances and more imbalances and more imbalances. It's all cascading imbalance created by the fact that they can be caught in these collections. Yeah, I think I have the word collection here somewhere. Well, I should add that. Collection. But these collections end up having what we consider to be these forces, and they don't have forces. They don't do anything. They change how the forces, the universe bit field, that stream is interfered with because of it. That pressure is imbalanced because of this collection of specific directional bits in a portion of the field. Alright, polarization. So these are, I'm just saying, these are just the key elements, right? So it's just about direction. Everything else is a constant. So the only thing not constant is the direction of the bit. Otherwise, everything about the bits is the same, except for this fact that it has a polarization. So it has a, you could say, an orientation. A shape, either it has a shape or it comes at specific directions that are significant. So if something comes at something in the same orientation or plane that it exists in, like say the solar system is sort of flat, and if something comes in on that plane, it's obviously more likely to hit a planet than if you turn the plane the opposite way, vertical, it's less likely to hit a planet. So that's sort of what, that would be an orientation that increases potency. Now I'm not, this part isn't written in stone. It could be the very shape of the quanta, they could have a shape, or polarization could just be an effect in three-dimensional space of having exactly the same plane of orientation. So either the point is that polarization, think of the P word, is potency. Polarization changes potency. Now the effect is more probabilistic. It's more likely to interact if it's the correct or consistent polarization. And this then creates what we perceive as the stronger gravitational force of magnetism and electric charge. They're the same force as gravity. It's the same thing. It's just directional bits moving. It's an actual physical, photonic, quantonic force. A magnet is radiating arrows, energy, quote unquote. And that is what's moving or affecting the other bits, is this imbalance created in the field in the bit field. And the imbalance is created by the stronger potency of same plane orientation. The arrows are coming on a similar plane to the thing they're interacting with, and therefore their potency has been increased. And if they're at the opposite plane, their potency is decreased from what would be a normal chaotic any plane. So from when you have a mixed plane, that's what we call this neutral state. When you have a polarized plane, that's where you have this capacity to have almost invisible this way, opposite plane, and highly visible when it's same plane. Okay. So this would be one of the laws. All action force is subnuclear, period. So all action happens to subnuclear bits. The parts bits must all be individually moved, exchanged. So the planet Earth does not move unless every single arrow captured, every bit in an orbit, has to actually be hit by a probabilistic influence of arrows that push it in the direction of the planet's movement. There's no magical "I'll pull you along." I can only pull you along if I influence the bit field, and the bit field pushes you along. So it's all controlled by changes in the stream of the bit field, and that flow of that stream affects every single bit. There is no such thing as just move the proton over here and everything else just automatically moves. There's nothing automatic about its movement. Every little thing that was like the sun, if I move the sun over and the other planets have to reorient, they can't just reorient. Movement of the sun means that now all the influence and gravities are different, and now all the shadows will be different, and they'll still have to be moved by complete kinetic interactions with bits. So the bits have to move it. So all force happens subnuclearly. Me doing this is a subnuclear happening, event. This doesn't happen unless every subnuclear element is influenced by force imbalances created by some initiation of the force imbalance, some stream of imbalance that's moving through my neural network that came from the external world. It came in from the external world. It created energies and molecular crap and all kinds of chemistry and all kinds of stuff going on, and those are all imbalances, and all those imbalances went through pipes, the neurons, the things, and then those imbalances were conveyed to other chemistry, created more chemical imbalances, created more, but it's all this kinetic pool ball. Every little bit had to have a pool ball thrown at it, so to speak, to knock it in the direction. There had to be some imbalance in the field created by some imbalance element that had to get to it and actually push it, kinetically react with it, to push it. Every single bit of the matter in my hand has to be hit in the direction of a movement. So that's the law. And the law is conservative in the sense that, say if I take one photon, I have this cup, and let's say it's completely balanced. It's not, it's jittering, doing all kinds, but let's say it's perfectly balanced. And I hit it with just one arrow, one photon. One little arrow hits it. Where it will go will be the direction that photon came, because it's in a complete neutral state. So let's say I could make it in a completely neutral, balanced state. I can't do that. I can only do it theoretically. So I'm just saying theoretically, imagine it's that way. The math would be that I take all the number of directional arrows of this cup, like I say, and if they had a net movement, say the cup was going this way, the one photon would move it that one little tiny bit in this other direction, but it would move it proportional to what we call the mass, but the mass is really just a number representing how many directional bits are in it. So you would take the total number of directional bits and divide the photon's amplitude, its energy, by that huge gigantic number, and that'll tell you how much this whole cup will be moved by one photon. So it won't move much. Like say if a photon's Planck movement is this, it'll move some zillionth of that because one photon hit it. But that's it. It's completely conservative. Whatever little arrows go in, they will represent themselves in some sort of action out in that direction eventually. But the point is they can get caught in these orbits for a long time, and they can, instead of rolling in a direction, they can roll in a circle. That's another key thing that I've got to point out, is that the patterns can be redundant. It's not the right word. Like a fractal, the pattern can be built on top of itself. You have this happening, and then that whole thing is doing that, and then that whole thing is doing this, and then that whole thing is doing this. So there can be pattern inside a pattern inside a pattern inside a pattern. Alright. So I think I covered the bits I've got so far, but I'm just saying this is pretty much all you need to know, right? Is that it's a bit field, there's a constancy and a regularity about the constituent components. They're the same and in every respect except for this directional component. All you really have is a capacity to capture them in patterns. There can be frequency, which is a kind of pattern. The exchanges are all kinetic and whole. There's no leftover. Bits don't do half a bit. Bits don't do a quarter of a bit. They just do a full bit exchange. Polarization is just an orientation argument in 3 dimensions. And that's it. There's nothing else. This is what makes the universe happen. It's all really just the capture of directional bits. That's what matter is. A capture of a particular pattern of directional bits. Alright. So till the next... So I'll just list these as the law videos, I guess, and I'll try to expand on this explanation to include the stuff people find fascinating, which is nonsense, but you know, relativity and stuff, which there isn't any. There's absolute velocity. So I'll get to velocity and acceleration, but those are kind of, this is what I'm trying to get to, is that these laws are so simple you almost don't need to bother. You could just understand that acceleration is the collection of arrow imbalance. You're now collecting arrows in a direction, an imbalance in your directionality, and velocity is the maintenance of that directional imbalance. You're just going to keep it. You keep the imbalance. So acceleration is the creation of the imbalance. Velocity is the maintenance of the imbalance. And you can't get rid of the imbalance until something of equal opposite force gets rid of it for you, which means you have to have, if you have too many arrows going this way, you have to run into something with too many arrows going that way. Or you'll just keep going that way. Duh. So I mean, yeah, I mean, I'll add those things, but those things are superfluous to this simple mechanism. You almost don't need those words anymore. Not that they're not important, I just mean that And charge and magnetism, that's where it gets, that's this polarization thing, and that does get a little bit complicated to explain, but I'm just saying, once you get the idea that all it is the same arrows being exchanged, they're just exchanging arrows more probable or less probable to affect each other, to block gravity, to interfere or create imbalance in the field. All right. Yeah. Good enough. So until next time.